Welcome to Transparency with Dr. C, the podcast where leadership gets real. I'm Dr. Brittany Castongway, and I don't like to sugarcoat things. So we're going to explore what it truly means to, lead with courage, connect, and be vulnerable. Because real leadership, it's not about having the answers, it's about showing up, owning your story, and leading from the heart. So if you're ready to grow, stretch, and be authentic, you're in the right spot. Hi, I hope everyone is having a great day. I'm Dr. C, and I'm so happy that you're here for another episode of Transparency with Dr. C. And today we are going to talk about processing disappointment. That's a big one. And it's definitely something that I've struggled with here recently. Being a small business owner is not easy. And so something that I've been working on for the past few months is funding, so I can grow and scale my business and offer more content. In order to do that, I needed some upfront cash flow. And so I've been working really closely with a local lender to work on funding. 3 months later, I received news that I felt was very frustrating and wasn't a reflection of me, because being told no after it had gone through underwriting in the pre-approval process and everything, to be told that the loan committee was not going to approve me for something that was outside of my control was really hard. It had nothing to do with my package, my projections, my financials, even my personal financials, the business financials. The reason that they said no was really a risk-averse reason due to the current market. And so I found that really hard. I have a lot of things in the pipeline that are waiting on this. I have vendors that are waiting on this funds. I was hoping to bring on, another employee with these funds. And so being told no was really hard. To put it bluntly, I was pissed. And it was a very hard conversation for me to have on a Friday. And then to try to go into the weekend and enjoy my weekend. I did some reflecting. And I found that, while I was mad and while I was disappointed, it kind of was a blessing in disguise. Because do I really want to work with a lender that's going to be so risk adverse for a small, growing, thriving business that's also woman and veteran owned over something silly due to a current market? And, I think the answer is no. And so I think that was a blessing in disguise. And it took me a couple days to get to that point where I was upset about it. And so that's kind of why this was weighing on my heart. And I think that, a lot of us, even if you're not an entrepreneur, leadership, being an employee, a parent, a spouse, just being an individual, disappointment's difficult for us to handle at all stages and ages of our life, right? And that's why even me, myself, I'm still learning how to focus on, working through that disappointment. And so that's why I wanted to talk about that today and start off by sharing my story. I want to also define how this works in our leadership journey. When we are leaders, we're going to struggle with disappointment. We're going to have to go into meetings we don't want to deal with, listen to responses that we don't want to have to deal with, be told no, be pushed over for, an appointment, a project, a promotion, a team lead, something that we felt we needed. And there's also going to be times where other things are going to happen that we don't agree with, like policy changes, leadership changes, being burnt out and needing a break and not knowing how to take that for yourselves. I say all this to say, not to deter you from being a leader, because we need quality leaders in this world. I just want you to be understanding that disappointment is part of leadership, and it's not something that you can avoid. And when we are better equipped to handle leadership and disappointment together, we will be a much better person that's more responsive. And that's going to be less emotionally driven. And that's why we're here today, right? So let's talk about the nature of disappointment. Disappointment is a natural human reaction to things, right? No one wants to be told no. We all want things to fall in our lap, right? You can call it, a response to entitlement if you want, because that's one way to look at it. You can just simply say that we're human, and disappointment is a hard feeling to respond with. When, case in point, my toddler, she's going to be 2 soon. We bought her crayons for the shower. She doesn't take baths. She takes showers with us and has since she could probably sit up in her baby bath. It's something that I did with one of my other kids that I found was really helpful. So we just throw her in the shower with us, and she loves it. She just sits there and plays. Well, she's getting to the stage now where she needs toys, and we don't have any toys in the shower for her. So bought her crayons for the shower. So cute. Draw on them, and then it rinses right off, and it doesn't stain, right? And she loves to color right now. Coloring and drawing is her favorite thing, any type of art. So she knew that there was crayons because she could see them on the counter. We hadn't opened them yet. Want the crayons. I want to draw. I want to color. And so we do. We open it for her. We put her in the bath. She's loving it. She's doodling on the walls, on the ground, everywhere, right? And then it's time to clean up. And she doesn't want to clean up. She doesn't want to take her crayons away. She doesn't understand that these crayons are just for the shower. And so unfortunately, I had to pry them out of her hands. And then she was mad at me because I took them from her and she just wanted her dad. And that in itself was disappointment, right? She didn't understand why she couldn't have her crayons, why they were just for the shower. And so I feel a lot of times when we're struggling with disappointment, it's sometimes because we don't understand the why behind the reason. And I think that's a really good understanding in face value that we as leaders should just kind of set as a ground rule, is that when we have to give a reason for a decision, whether it's us giving that reason or the reason why someone is giving us the no, right? Just take the extra 2 seconds to explain the why. I can't explain the why to my 2-year-old because she doesn't understand. So I had to hide the crayons and then deal with her being mad at me for the next 20 minutes. That's okay because she wanted daddy. And so that was cute. She's going to forget. She's already forgotten that the crayons are gone, right? Until I pull them back out tonight for bath. And then it's going to be the same thing all over again. Well, that's part of parenting. Leadership, and sometimes I akin it to parenting, it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes you have to learn how to, deal with big emotions, whether they're your own or somebody else's. And that's just leadership. And so I think it's really important first when we're dealing with it is to understand what is causing the disappointment, why it feels heavy. So for me, with my loan, it felt heavy because I felt a responsibility to my business. I had expectations and all these things that I was planning, all these things in the pipeline, all just got stopped. That was hard. That was what I was struggling with, though. When we're leaders, that's the responsibility and the expectations, right? I'm not Buddhist, but in Buddhism, there's a saying that expectation leads to disappointment. That's why that's so valid to this conversation. When you expect something, you then feel entitled to it, right? Because this is what is expected. This is what should happen. And that's where that disappointment comes in, is because we're no longer getting what we thought we're entitled to. I felt entitled to that loan because I had done everything to make sure I was entitled to that loan. I had the package. I had the numbers. I had the projections. I had the credit score. I had the cash flow. I had the 10% injection. I had all these things. And so for me, being told no for a reason that was outside of my control was not a reasonable expectation that I should have managed ahead of time, because it's not something I can control. And that's where the disappointment came from. For my 2-year-old, hers is much more simple, right? She sees the crayons. She loves to draw. She wants to draw. Why should she have to give them up when the shower time's over when she can just keep drawing? It's a reasonable expectation in her 2-year-old mind, right? Well, you're an employee that you just told no and denied their PTO is going to have the same reaction to any of us. You know, I saved up my time. I put in my request like you wanted me to. And now you're telling me no. Well, why? Because the expectation, right? The entitlement is that that's my PTO. I've done the things I'm supposed to do. And so now I'm entitled to take that time off. That's leadership, is being transparent and explaining that why, explaining that understanding to them. You know, if there is a valid reason that they can't take that PTO, what is that reason? Does it make sense? Is it logical? Is it something that they can understand? You have to explain that, right? You have to be the leader that they need you to be by taking the time, slowing down. Now, I'm prior military, and I spent almost a decade of my life jumping when they said jump. But I'm also that individual that said, I'll jump. But before I jump, I need to know why. Does this make sense? Is this the best way that we're doing things? Explain to me the expectations that you're wanting, so that way when I jump, I know how high and for how long. Another phrase that we use in the military is learning to shut up and color. I was Air Force. I don't know why we said that. Maybe it came from Marines and wanting to color all the time, or not eating their crayons. I'm not quite sure. But I would tell you, and I would go into the office, and I would even have one-on-ones with my superiors, and I would say, look, if you tell me that you need me to shut up and color, do it. I will shut up and color. I need you to lay out the expectations and to be clear and transparent with me. So that way when I go back and tell my team that we need to shut up and color, why we're shutting up and color. Because the expectation is going to be that we need to do things this way, or that this isn't the best way to do it. And therefore it's going to lead to disappointment, because we feel entitled as leaders that we can do things a certain way, right? There's a logical thought process here that leads to disappointment. Disappointment just doesn't happen. And that's what is so important about understanding the difference between disappointment and being angry and upset because it didn't meet our expectations, and then viewing it as a failure. And this is how we're going to kind of switch into our next topic. Failing and disappointment are often closely related, right? We look at disappointment as a failure. I could have looked at disappointment of my loan not being approved as a failure. Well, that's not true. Because I could go to any other lender and put in the same loan package and possibly get approved, right? Because they may not view the market as an adverse effect on my business, because I had everything that I needed. I had taken the responsibility to ensure that I crossed all of my T's and dotted all my I's to make sure that everything was right, and that I was qualified for the package. That's not failure. I didn't fail. I was disappointed. Now, when you fail, you're absolutely 100% allowed to feel disappointed. 100%. When I fall and I don't meet my expectations, or I don't make the sale, or I don't win the client, I'm disappointed. That doesn't mean I failed per se. It just means I have to get up and dust myself off. That goes into resilience, which I think is a really good topic that we'll talk about another time. Your ability to bounce back from failure tells us how resilient you are. Resilience is our ability to take things in that upset us, process them, and then let them go so we can move forward, and to not dwell on them. You have to be able to do the same thing with disappointment. How you get through disappointment is a type of resilience. You are going to face disappointment at any point in your life. You're probably dealing with some right now. How do you work through that? Being disappointed is okay. It doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't make you a loser. It doesn't mean that you're not great and amazing and capable of so many awesome things. It's a setback. And from that setback, we can learn and pivot. How are you pivoting? I could have viewed the loan as a disappointment and a failure. Instead, I viewed it as a disappointment, and now I'm pivoting. Now I'm changing my sales tactics. Now I'm changing my plans. My content that I still have the pipeline is going to happen. But now I just have to get creative with how it's going to happen. I'm going to go talk to other lenders. I'm doing other things. I'm looking at other avenues, right? I'm pivoting. Because it's not a failure. It's a setback. It's a no does not mean, in this situation, no, you can't have it. It just means not from us. Try another route, right? That's the beautiful thing about life and leadership, is that there's no one way to be an amazing leader. That's why we call it authentic leadership, because you're dealing and leading in the way that's true to you and your values and your morals and your personality. And so everything that we're talking about here, how we're pivoting, how we're being resilient, how we're working through that, that's what we call healthy processing. Now, I'm not going to lie. When I got that call on a Friday, I wanted to throw some things, and I wanted to go have a cold beer and some queso and chips and throw my middle finger up at the world. Like I did. I wanted to do all those things. That wasn't healthy processing, and I knew it. And so what I do is I allow myself to sit and feel those feelings. Be angry. Call your best friend and vent. That's what I was doing. I did all those things. And I spent the weekend mad. And by doing that, by sitting with those feelings, by processing them, by talking it out, I allowed myself to heal from those feelings, to bounce back and learn how to pivot. It gave me a clearer mind when I came back into the office on Monday. If you're not feeling those feelings and dealing with them, and as soon as they happen, you're going to end up burying it. And then that's when other things can happen that are not healthy, right? That's when, we can become angry and take it out on others. That's how, unfortunately, depression, alcoholism, drug use, all these things are rooted in many different things. There's many different roots of why people struggle. But for a lot of people, it comes from viewing disappointment as a failure and not dealing with those emotions and not processing them and working through them. When we haven't learned how to communicate and have open and authentic relationships with people, we don't know how to handle our feelings. those are really big feelings and they're not comfortable. For me, I consider myself pretty even leveled headed. Like, I don't get angry very often. I get passionate about things. I get, energetic, and I want to go and do things, and I'm like a go person, but I don't get mad or offended very often. And so when I do, I don't like how it makes me react as a person, because I feel like I just get like this hot, fiery emotion in the pit of my stomach. I get hot and sweaty, and I can feel my blood pressure rising, and I get irrational. And sometimes I lash out at the people closest to me, like my husband or my best friend or my kids. Or the dog who just walked in front of my way. Why do you have to walk right there? That's not properly dealing with emotions. And it's not pretty on anybody. Nobody looks good, mad and pissed off and sad or depressed or strung out because they can't deal with life. That's why sometimes we need people outside of our scenario to help us. That's why we have professionals like coaches and counselors and doctors. But the first thing you have to do when you're struggling with disappointment is to sit with that feeling. I love journaling. I recommend, if you're not very good at, internally processing it, and you don't want to necessarily talk to somebody else because that's also hard and vulnerable, I recommend journaling it and writing it down. Because something that I learned as I went through all of my trauma as a teenager is that when we journal and write things down, we get it out. Even if you're getting it out on paper and you never share it with somebody else, you're still getting that emotion out and you're still helping to process that emotion. And so you're learning what that emotion really looks like. Are you really upset at the no? Or are you upset at what the no caused, like the expectation, that entitlement that you felt that you deserved? What is causing that disappointment? And so there's some really common reactions to disappointment. Denial, not taking responsibility, blaming others, rooting back to perfectionism, and just avoidance. None of these are good and healthy. And again, they don't look pretty on anybody. They're hard emotions. Taking responsibility and admitting that you were wrong, big. Not denying and blaming others. A lot of people who struggle with perfectionism struggle with being the true and authentic version of themselves. We're not perfect. I mean, God made me perfect, but I'm not perfect. There's a lot of things that are messy in my life. And sometimes it's really, really a really admirable trait when we can stop and admit that we messed up, or that our expectations were misplaced, or that, you're right, I didn't deserve that promotion because I wasn't ready. How can I make myself ready for the next opportunity? How can I pivot? How can I grow from this experience? So this is why I recommend journaling, right? Because sometimes we don't know what's causing that and what our reaction is. I didn't know for the longest time that a lot of the anger I was feeling from my trauma was actually grief, because I was grieving the loss of something that I was never going to get back as the result of my trauma. And I now know that that's grief. And so when I feel that anger raising inside of me from my trauma, I can look at that little kid inside of me and I can say, it's okay. I love you and I'm sorry for what you went through. And that anger melts away because I understand what that emotion is now. Disappointment is caused by an emotion. I refer to it in this podcast a lot as expectation and entitlement, because that tends to be a common one, but it's not necessarily what it is. So when you journal, you're pausing, you're reflecting, you're taking it and writing it out, and then you can reread it later. and then I'll help you reframe it. So I call it pivoting. We can pivot. And not like in the Friends when Ross is telling you to pivot. Pivot! I want you to actually pivot. Look at it. Like, okay, it didn't work this time. What can I do to either help me get there next time or change my way of thinking, change the way that I did something, change my execution? That's how we reframe it and grow. So disappointment, such a hard emotion, right? Nobody wants to be disappointed. Nobody wants to feel like they've disappointed somebody. I used to say that my oldest, who's now 16, that when he was little, I didn't have to yell at him because if he felt disappointed, that was worse than me yelling. And that's hard. It was a hard one to deal with as a mom, to not make him feel disappointed, but to also know that that was like a secret weapon in my back pocket. And that's not something I recommend. Don't ever make someone feel disappointed. If I could go back, that's something that I would change for sure. But learning how to respond healthy to disappointment, that teaches us a lot about resilience and adaptability. It shows you your true grit and how deep you can go as a person. And then when you journal and write it down or talk about it, and you can reflect on it and reframe it. And it gives us clarity for that course correction. Just like I told you at the beginning with my loan. I'm going to go and talk to other lenders and look at other options and, talk about being risk adverse, like in the beginning of my conversation, because that's not one I knew I needed to have with a bank as a small business owner. And now I do, but I'm also looking at different ways that I can create my content to get it out there to keep my pipeline moving. So I have my clarity now. I have my course correction. I'm working on my process. And then my biggest tip for you before we end is just be nice to yourself. Have compassion for yourself. I feel like sometimes, and this could be a perfectionist trait in me, is that sometimes we are nicer to others than we are to ourselves. And for me, I know that my expectations are incredibly high. And so sometimes I feel like I don't necessarily hold others to the same expectations I have for myself because I don't feel like they could meet those expectations. Which is a terrible trait to have, by the way, and I'm working on it. As a leader, I should clearly communicate my responsibilities and expectations to you. And my expectations I have for myself shouldn't be so grand and high and mighty that no other reasonable employee of mine can meet that. Then that means that I need to be nicer to myself because my expectations are too high and too demanding if I can't expect them of my employee, right? That's not nice. Be nice to yourself. And that's where that self-compassion comes in. Being disappointed is a hard journey and it's hard to rebound from. There's things that are going to continue to disappoint us. And there's things that are going to disappoint us that we didn't even know we wanted or were going to upset us. And ultimately, the best thing you can do is to just be nice to yourself, love yourself, and have grace for yourself. And guess what? This self-compassion, it ties back into episode 2. So if you didn't watch it, about sitting with yourself, go watch it. And if you watched it, give yourself a high five because it all ties in. Leadership is a continuum. It's multifaceted and it requires a lot of growth and work. It's not easy. And it's a lifelong journey. The moment I think I have something figured out, life shows up and is like, nah, girl, you really don't. That's okay. Because I like the unsuspected. It keeps life interesting. I like the spontaneity of it. And so that's kind of like my last words of wisdom for you today. It's to be nice, have compassion. And so as you're thinking about what you're going to be doing for the next week, if you're struggling with disappointment right now, or you struggled with disappointment recently, or maybe you're preparing for something like a big proposal or project or asking for a promotion, I want you to build in time to slow down and reflect on what you would do if you don't get the answer that you want. How are you going to build in time to, reflect and reframe disappointment? Anything that's really important. Again, journaling is a great way to start if you don't know how. Calling your best friend, sitting down with your significant other or a parent, and just be like, hey, set expectations up front. I don't want advice. I just want to vent. I just need to get this off my chest. And then do it. That's the great thing about being human, is that we all struggle with disappointment. The biggest thing you can do moving forward is learn how you're going to respond and grow from it. So my challenge for you after this podcast is to think about a disappointment that you've had to deal with, or maybe one that you're going through right now. I want you to write down what it was, how you felt, and how you reacted to it. And then I want you to tell me what caused the disappointment. Like, what was the root cause of that emotion? Why did you feel that? And what could you have done differently? And then I want you to tell me how you would pivot from this going forward. And you know what's even amazing, like even better, is that this is a community of people just trying to be people. And so if you're willing, I would love for you to reach out and to schedule a virtual coffee with me and just tell me what that is. My virtual coffees are on my website at strategichrinovations.com. They're free 30-minute blocks. And I just want to hear what that disappointment was, what you learned from it, and how you're going to do better next time. It's just a growth technique. And I love that growth mindset that we're exploring here, because we're not perfect. I mean, I've told you a couple times in this episode alone where I'm not perfect. And I love that authenticity. That's a hard word. I love that authenticity that we get to bring to this podcast by being transparent and talking about these hard emotions, because we're all doing it together. We're all struggling. We're all just trying to figure out life. Let's do it together. Let's make a community of people who are just open and messy and just talking it out. I love that. So I look forward to hearing from you. Disappointment's not something that we ever expect, but something that we should always know how to grow from and how to properly react. So take the time, do the homework, and be nice to yourself. Go to the mirror and give yourself just a high five on the mirror. Just leave a whole palm print on the mirror right now. Just high five yourself and just say how nice you are and how much you love yourself. And like, girl, you look good in those jeans today. Or did you lose some weight? I see you. We're just out here doing the darn thing. Love that for you. Okay. So again, this is Dr. C. You're listening to Transparency with Dr. C. And I hope that you like this. You leave me a comment, do your homework, set up a virtual coffee with me so we can talk. And then most importantly, share this with your network so that we can keep helping this world grow and be a better place. And sometimes it starts with empathy and self-compassion. So I hope you have a wonderful day and make smart choices. I'll see you next time. Bye.